আসসালামু আলাইকুম প্রিয় এনটিভির দর্শকবৃন্দ, আপনাদেরকে এনটিভির এক্সক্লুসিভ প্রোগ্রামে স্বাগতম। আজকে আমাদের বিষয় হচ্ছে আমরা আজকে কথা বলবো ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন নিয়ে। আপনারা সবাই জানেন এই সময়টা, বিশেষ করে ব্রিটেনে এই ঠান্ডার সময় আমরা প্রতি বছর আমরা ভ্যাকসিন, বিশেষ করে ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন দিয়ে আসছি। তো এই ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন অ্যাকচুয়ালি কী এবং কেন এটা দেওয়া দরকার, সেই বিষয়ে আমরা কথা বলার জন্য আজকে আমাদের বিশেষ অতিথি ডক্টর কয়েস আহমেদ, উনি সেই ব্রিস্টল থেকে আমাদের এখানে জয়েন করেছেন। ওনার সঙ্গে আমরা কথা বলবো এই ব্যাপারে বিস্তারিত। আসুন আগে আমরা ডক্টর কয়েস আহমেদ, ওনার সঙ্গে পরিচয় হয়ে নিই। ধন্যবাদ ডক্টর কয়েস আহমেদ, আপনাকে স্বাগতম জানাচ্ছি এনটিভির আজকের এক্সক্লুসিভ প্রোগ্রামে। সো আপনি যদি আপনাকে উপস্থাপন করেন।
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Assalamu alaikum bhai. Thank you for having me today. My name is Dr. Koyas Ahmed. I'm a GP Bristol Haki, and I work in general practice and also in the urgent care and out of hours service in Bristol.
ওকে, ধন্যবাদ। আসলে ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিনটা খুবই জরুরি আমাদের জন্য, বিশেষ করে এটাও এক ধরনের ভাইরাস। এটাও ঠিক করোনা ভাইরাসের এক্স্যাক্টলি করোনা ভাইরাস না, বাট এটাও অন্য এক রকমের ভাইরাস। তো এটা আপনারা ফ্রি পাচ্ছেন আমাদের NHS থেকে, ন্যাশনাল হেলথ সার্ভিস থেকে। বাট এটা কি জন্য জরুরি? আপনি ডক্টর কয়েস আহমেদের কাছে আমার প্রথম প্রশ্ন, আসলে ফ্লু জিনিসটা কি, আপনি কি আমাদেরকে বলবেন? ক্যান ইউ কাইন্ডলি এক্সপ্লেইন ফর আওয়ার ভিউয়ার্স হোয়াট ইজ অ্যাকচুয়ালি ফ্লু?
Sure. So flu is, first of all, it's a very common illness. It's a viral illness, so caused by a virus, not bacteria. But it's not a cold. So a lot of people think it's a cold. You know, when you have a cold, like a bit of a runny nose, or feeling a bit snotty, or blocked up and congested, and maybe a mild cough or a sore throat. A lot of people will say they have the flu, when in actual fact it's not the flu, because the flu is much more serious and you feel a lot more unwell. So normally you might have a much higher temperature, you might have lots of aches and pains, and you might even stay in bed for a few days because you feel a lot more unwell. So a lot of people may say they have the flu when they have just a nasty cold, but they actually don't have the flu, which is caused by influenza, a different virus that causes the common cold.
Okay, I mean usually আমরা coronavirus, we have seen there are lots of information about coronavirus, so we kind of now recognize what is coronavirus, and we usually can able to identify what is the symptoms of coronavirus, like as for example, if you have severe temperature, if you cannot find any test, anything like this. These are the main common symptoms of coronavirus. However, do you know what is the common symptoms of flu? I mean, how can we, our people can identify and able to contact GP, tell them, yes, I have the flu?
Okay, sure. So first of all, there's a few similarities between coronavirus, the flu, and colds. However, the difference is with coronavirus, as you've mentioned, you'd have a fever or a cough that's persistent and new, and a loss of taste or smell. Those are the three classic features of coronavirus. With the flu, however, you would have a fever, a high temperature of 38 and above. You may feel congested or have a runny nose. You may have a sore throat. So similar to the cold, but you'd feel much more unwell. You don't normally have a very high temperature with a cold, but with the flu, you would have a high fever. Also, you feel very achy, very fatigued and lethargic.
Right.
And you feel like you don't want to get up and do anything. And that's the main difference between perhaps a cold and the flu. So say, for example, you have those symptoms, you have congestion or a runny nose, you have a sore throat, you have a high temperature, you have aches and pains. It may well be the flu, and that is different in terms of the cold and coronavirus, but in some ways the management is very similar, where you have to rest, you have to have lots of fluids, paracetamol and ibuprofen, and then usually you don't need any extra medication if you're not feeling too unwell.
Right, okay. So flu is really can be quite serious, isn't it?
Absolutely. So 11,000 people on average die each year from the flu, and as well as causing, various symptoms, as we've mentioned, you can feel very unwell. You can end up in hospital with the flu if you've got underlying medical problems or a severe case of the flu. And obviously, what we don't want to do is get people into hospital because of the flu, with coronavirus going around and other conditions at the moment, when it's much higher risk.
Yeah, I mean, in our community, in particularly our Bangladeshi community or our ethnic minority community, we have seen some kind of disagreement or some kind of misconcept, I would say, that there's no need for flu vaccine. There might be something else, they might not be helpful, and they need lots of prompting, lots of encouragement to go to GP or chemist or wherever it is available to get this flu jab. So why do you think this is happening in our society?
Sure. Unfortunately, and perhaps this year more than ever, there's a lot of myths and misconceptions circulating on the internet, on WhatsApp groups, for example, about coronavirus, about the flu, about vaccinations in general. And what we have to understand is, whenever you see any of these articles or these videos, you need to make sure that they're from reputable sources, and you do your own research, but also you research from approved and reputable sources. And I think one of the reasons why a lot of people are finding that they don't need the flu vaccine, because they feel that it's not necessary. However, as we mentioned, it can make people feel unwell, it can make you go into hospital, you can actually die of it as well. So the flu vaccine, it can be very effective. No vaccine is 100% effective, but the flu vaccine can be very effective in especially at-risk or vulnerable groups. And by having the flu vaccine, you reduce your risk of having flu, you reduce your risk of having going into hospital, and also it's suggested, or it's thought, that if you have flu and COVID, you're more than twice as likely to die of it if you have both.
Okay, আমরা ডক্টর কয়েস আহমেদ, আমরা বিগত বেশ কিছুদিন যাবত, ধরেন like 2-3 years, we have seen this flu vaccine now is available for the children as well, isn't it, including the primary school children. They don't do a kind of injection form, but they have different other forms of having vaccine, flu vaccine. So why children need flu vaccine? Is there any need for it?
So, I mean, children, although if they get the flu, they're probably not going to be as adversely or badly affected maybe as other vulnerable groups like older people. However, they're known as super spreaders, so they can often get the flu and bring it back into home and spread it to their parents or their grandparents or vulnerable members of the family. And also, we've seen that under 5s in particular are at higher risk of complications from the flu, so younger children can be at more risk. You've touched upon the different vaccines, and I don't know if we'll go into that later, but there are various vaccines. The nasal flu vaccine is for children above the age of 2, and then you've got the injectable flu vaccine, which is for adults, and you've got the different version of the injectable flu vaccine for over 65s. So there are versions that are different, and there is a lot of controversy and misunderstanding about whether it's halal or not, and we can discuss that later if you like.
Okay, right. So আমরা যেটা জানতে পারলাম, আসলে ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিনটা আপনার ওই কিছু vulnerable গ্রুপ যেটা আছে আমাদের সোসাইটিতে যারা আছে, as for example age over 65, children, and those people who are kind of suffering more severe illness, so they might be more vulnerable for other illness, particularly this virus. So can you kindly explain clearly who are these vulnerable groups in our society?
Sure. So there's a few different vulnerable groups, and they're listed on the government websites, on the NHS website. But essentially, they include the over 65s, as you've mentioned, those with underlying medical problems. So if you have diabetes or heart disease or asthma, which unfortunately a lot of people in our Bangladeshi and Asian communities do have, or if you're pregnant women, if you're children. But there have been a few other groups that have also been added this year to the at-risk groups. So this year, compared to previous years, normally it's only a certain age of children, but this year it's been extended up until the age of 11, so including year 7s, when it was previously just primary school children. So year 7 children are also eligible for the flu vaccine for free on the NHS. In addition, those who might be living with people who are shielding on the NHS shielding list. So if you've got someone like a parent or grandparent who's very vulnerable and has been included in the shielding list, other household members in the same household can get the vaccine for free as well. So that's another group that have been added. And this year, the other final group that's been added is those who are aged above 50. So 50 to 64 can also have the flu vaccine for free. But what I wanted to stress is that if you don't have it for free, that doesn't mean you can't have it. You can still have it. And it's usually quite cheap and cost effective if you go to a pharmacy, 10 to 12 pounds perhaps in most pharmacies, if that.
Okay, that's I think very good to know that the government this year increased age from 50 plus year. Anybody can have vaccine after 50 years age. Okay, Dr. Koyes Ahmed আমাদের সঙ্গে থাকুন, আমাদের একটা বিরতিতে যেতে হচ্ছে, বিজ্ঞাপন বিরতি। আমরা যথাশীঘ্রই আবার ফেরত আসবো। সুপ্রিয় দর্শকবৃন্দ, আমাদের সঙ্গেই থাকুন, এনটিভির সঙ্গেই থাকুন। আমরা আজকে ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন নিয়ে আলাপ করছি। ধন্যবাদ। শুধু দর্শকবৃন্দ, বিরতির পরে আবার ফেরত আসলাম আমরা। আমি ওবায়দুল খান আপনাদেরকে স্বাগত জানাচ্ছি আজকে এনটিভির এক্সক্লুসিভ প্রোগ্রামে। আমরা আজকে আলোচনা করছি ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন নিয়ে। আমাদের সঙ্গে আছেন আমাদের বিস্টলের জিপি ডক্টর কয়েস আহমেদ। So we're going back to Dr. Koyes Ahmed. So we're talking about flu vaccine, how it is impacting on our particularly vulnerable peoples. So this time I'm going to asking you, what about the children? I mean, there are some misconceptions as well, like say, is that vaccine halal? Is it haram? Shall I go for it? Shall I use it for my children? So what is your explanation?
Sure, thank you. So first and foremost, when it comes to vaccinations, it's a very personal decision. But there, as you said rightly, there are a lot of myths and misconceptions about the vaccines generally, whether it's halal or haram. And I think that all comes down to the nasal flu vaccine. So the nasal flu vaccine contains pork gelatin or porcine, and that's used as a stabilizer. So it's a very processed form. It's not consumed by mouth, but it's inside the nasal flu vaccine, and essentially it's there to stabilize it and make it effective and worthwhile.
Right.
A lot of people may not agree with that and may find that haram, but if you have discussions, if you feel that's the case, I would certainly to say that have a chat with your GP or your pharmacist, have a chat with a Muslim scholar, a religious scholar, and also have a chat with your family, because you have to look at the risk versus benefits. And a lot of individuals and organizations and institutions have actually said it could be permissible if your benefits outweigh the risks. And
so are you saying, are you saying that it is, yes, indeed, there is some pork element there?
Yeah, so some medications, unfortunately for some of us, would have pork elements or porcine gelatin, but it's a highly processed form, and it's used as a stabilizer. It's not, you're not eating it, you're having it in the nasal spray. So you're right, it does contain that, but because it's used for medicinal purposes, some people, and again that's a discussion for each individual and each family, may find it beneficial or permissible, especially if there's more risks by not having the flu vaccine because of what we discussed, with the fact that the flu in children could spread, not only affect them, but could spread to vulnerable people in the household. So when it comes to the flu vaccine, you've got your choices of the nasal flu vaccine for children, but this year, more so than previous years, if you don't want to have the nasal flu vaccine for your child, you can actually ask your GP or pharmacist for the injectable flu vaccine, which has no pork, no porcine content, but it's an injection, whereas the nasal flu vaccine is obviously a bit easier for children to have. It's up the nose, it's very quick, and it's actually probably more effective in reducing the spread of flu than the injectable flu vaccine in children.
Okay. So I think in also religiously, I think it is important. I think every religion saying it is important to save your life first, isn't it? In terms of choosing haram and halal, I think life comes first for any reason. So that's fine. Obviously it is, as you mentioned, it is up to the individual person to decide, isn't it, what they need to take. I'm going to ask you now, I mean, the flu vaccine is not just one type of flu vaccine. There are many types of flu vaccine available. So which one is more effective? Is there any particular vaccine we should think about it, or whatever it is our GP or chemist suggests we should go for it?
Sure.
How do you explain that?
Sure. So what happens every year, the WHO, the World Health Organization, meet up and look at the strains of the flu that are circulating around the world. So that happens early on in the year for the northern hemisphere, which we're in. So you look in sort of springtime, see what's happening around the world, and then the vaccines that year are made based on the strains that are predominant or circulating the most. Because as we know, the flu virus can mutate. There's different strains of the flu virus, and it's not the same one that affects everyone every year. So that's the problem with the flu virus. It mutates, it changes. So the WHO have these, these major meetings. They look at what's happening, and the flu vaccines are created on that. When it comes to, the flu vaccines are created on that. When it comes to the flu vaccines themselves, as you've mentioned, there's different types. So the over 65s have what we call a trivalent vaccine. That covers a few strains, 3 strains. Yeah. So trivalent covers 3 strains, but it has an adjuvant, which is an extra component which makes it stronger for the immune system to respond. So it helps strengthen the immune system, because as you can imagine, when you're older, your immune system is a bit weaker.
You need more powerful one.
Well, powerful in a sense that it gives you a bit of a kick, a bit of a boost. Whereas the majority of adults will have a quadrivalent vaccine that covers 4 strains, but that's between, say, 18 and 64. But it's not that one is more effective than the other.
And these are the most common strain currently.
Exactly.
Okay.
Based on what we've said before, so based on what is circulating around the world at that point in that year. And then the nasal flu vaccine is for children. So that's between the ages of 2 and in childhood. But if you're under the age of 2, say you're between 6 months and 2 years, and you've got a highly vulnerable child who's got lots of medical problems, who is highly at risk, they can have a flu vaccine, but they would have the injectable flu vaccine. But that's something you would discuss with a healthcare professional, obviously. You wouldn't just give it to them.
Okay, thank you for clarifying this. I think দর্শকবৃন্দ, আসলে ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিনটা খুবই ইম্পর্টেন্ট আমাদের, বিশেষ করে যারা বিভিন্ন রোগে আক্রান্ত, বিভিন্ন ক্রনিক ডিজিজ যেগুলোকে বলা হয়, যেগুলো কখনো সারবে না, আপনি ওষুধের উপরে থাকতে হবে, কন্ট্রোলে থাকতে হবে, সেই সমস্ত অসুখ নিয়ে যারা ভুগছে, বিশেষ করে ডায়াবেটিস, হার্ট ডিজিজ, বাচ্চা যারা আসমা কিংবা বয়স্ক যারা আসমা, এই সমস্ত ক্রনিক ডিজিজে আক্রান্ত, তাদের আসলে ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন দেওয়াটা অত্যন্ত জরুরি। আদারওয়াইজ আপনি ফ্লুতে আক্রান্ত হয়ে হসপিটালাইজড হওয়ার সম্ভাবনা বেশি। এবং at the moment, Dr. Qais Ahmed, obviously we have a serious problem of getting into hospitals because of the coronavirus situation, isn't it? So how is NHS right now accommodating those people who are currently having flu symptoms or having flu?
Sure. So I think that you've hit the nail on the head there, where you said that there's difficulties getting to hospital because of COVID, and that's even more reason to have the flu vaccine, because if you had the flu and unfortunately you ended up in hospital, you're at much higher risk of having complications and unfortunately even death because of the flu, and even COVID, or both. So you're right. I mean, there's a lot of stress and a lot of pressure on the hospitals at the moment because of COVID, and that's making it even more important to have the flu vaccine. And what I wanted to stress is it's not too late to have the flu vaccine. The flu season, we've got most of the flu season ahead of us, in fact, December, January, February, March. Sometimes it extends into April even. So we've got a few months ahead. There's still the flu vaccine available, and where you get the flu vaccine is either through your GP or through your pharmacist. And if you're not eligible for a free NHS flu vaccine, you can get it privately at pharmacies or private GP providers. So you don't have to go into hospital. You get the flu vaccine in the community, and if you have it, you're less likely to go into hospital and become unwell with the flu and develop complications.
Okay, so what we've been learned. The flu, basically, there is a particular time of the year we experience flu, and as you mentioned, it's the flu season. That could be winter period of time in UK, and we have to prepare just before winter to have our flu jab ready, isn't it?
Yeah, so the flu, in fact, actually you can get the flu at any point in the year. So it's influenza, it's a virus that circulates at any point in the year. However, the way we know it is, it's known as seasonal flu because it's more common much more common in the winter period, and that's why we see more people affected by it because of various issues, because of the winter months, because of the fact that people are indoors a bit more and closer to each other, so there's more spread, and generally people become a bit more unwell with these respiratory illnesses in winter for various reasons. So you're right, I mean it's available throughout the year. You could get the flu virus at any point in the year, however it's more common and predominant in the winter period.
Yeah, okay. Another question is, I mean, we're doing it more or less every year. So is there any longer term vaccine, or just every year we have to do same thing again and again?
Yeah, so the problem with the flu, or influenza, the virus that causes the flu, is, as we mentioned, it mutates, it can change. So every year it's not the same one or same strain. And so with these flu vaccine, they cover a few strains, and so that's why it's important to have it every year, because if you've had it 1 year before or 2 years before, it may not give you immunity. Your immune antibodies, what the body produces to help protect you against flu, may not last for very long enough to protect you the following year, and that's why it's important to have it every year, to protect yourself every year.
Okay, so I mean we kind of lucky then in that sense that coronavirus not changing its character or nature or anything like that yet.
Well, that's what we think anyhow, because we don't know for sure, and we're hopeful that it may not mutate and it may not change. However, as we know this year, there's so many uncertainties and unpredictability, so who knows what's going to happen, and it may even be that we have to have an annual COVID vaccine or coronavirus vaccine, but we don't know that for sure yet. And what I would say is right now we have to focus on the present, which means the flu vaccine, and when the COVID vaccine is available, have that.
Okay, I mean, obviously corona vaccines or coronavirus comes up because this is what we are facing at the moment, this is a hard reality. So we cannot, think without discussing coronavirus. There are some issue also, like coronavirus vaccine just now came up and we started having coronavirus vaccine right now. So is there any like time gaps between flu vaccine and corona vaccine? So must be something there.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I just wanted to clarify on that note that the flu vaccine won't protect you against the COVID coronavirus or COVID, and same with the COVID vaccine, it won't protect you against flu, because they're two different viruses that cause these illnesses. So I need to make sure that people are aware of that. They don't protect you from each condition. In terms of having a time gap, so generally speaking, because they're not live vaccines, the flu vaccine is what we call an inactivated vaccine. So it contains like a dead form of the influenza virus that's modified, so it won't cause the flu. So that's another important thing. Having the flu vaccine does not give you flu. That won't give you flu. So I just wanted to clarify that. So I mean, in terms of having a gap, sorry.
I mean, there are some, as you know, in particularly our Bengali community and Asian society, there are lots of myths as well. Like if we have flu vaccine, we might not have corona virus. So we may be protected already. So with this, so that's people are thinking. So as you just explained, so this is not the case.
Absolutely not the case. So we have to understand that flu is caused by influenza. COVID is caused by SARS-CoV-2, or that version of coronavirus. So it's two different viruses that look different, that behave differently, that are protected differently. So that's why it's important to have the vaccines separately. And on your in answer to your first question, there probably isn't any harm having both vaccines because they're not live. However, it's probably good to have a gap of a few weeks, because your body will produce an immune response after these vaccines. So what you don't want to do is probably have too strong an immune response. So ideally and preferably, it may be good to have a bit of a gap, although scientifically and theoretically it probably wouldn't do any harm if you didn't. Although I would say everyone's situation is different, and it's good to speak to your own doctor or pharmacist to find out more.
I think at the moment guidelines is about 2 weeks gap between flu vaccine to corona vaccines. Anyway, so our vulnerable people in our society, I think they should really consider flu vaccine first, because corona vaccine is still not available yet. So we still don't know how long it's going to come to our general public, isn't it? They are at the moment rolling out to different categories of people.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, I wanted to say, the flu vaccine can take a couple of weeks to actually be effective. We're up to 14 days in some people to be effective and provide protection. And that's why that 2-week gap you mentioned is probably a good gap to have, because you've got the flu vaccine protecting you, then you can have the COVID vaccine after that. So that's probably a good gap to think about.
Okay, ধন্যবাদ ডক্টর কয়েস আহমেদ। আই থিঙ্ক আমরা শুধু দর্শকবৃন্দ আমরা যেটা জানতে পারলাম যে দুইটা ভ্যাকসিন এই মুহূর্তে, করোনা ভ্যাকসিন এবং ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন আপনাকে ফ্লু থেকে শুধু প্রোটেক্ট করবে। কাজে আপনি যদি ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন দিতে চান, মনে করবেন না যে আপনাকে এটা করোনা ভাইরাস থেকে রক্ষা করবে। আমরা শুধু দর্শকবৃন্দ আমরা ব্রেকে যাচ্ছি, আবারও ব্রেক থেকে ফিরে এসে আবারও কথা বলবো আমাদের ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন সম্বন্ধে। ধন্যবাদ, আমাদের সঙ্গেই থাকুন। শুধু দর্শকবৃন্দ, বিরতির পরে আবারও স্বাগতম আমাদের এনটিভির এক্সক্লুসিভ প্রোগ্রাম। আজকে আমরা কথা বলছিলাম ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিনেশন নিয়ে, এবং মাঝে মধ্যে আমরা করোনা ভাইরাস এবং করোনা ভাইরাসের যে ভ্যাকসিন রিসেন্টলি আমাদের মাঝে চলে এসেছে, ফাইজারের যে ভ্যাকসিন, সেটা নিয়েও আমরা আজকে কথা বলবো একটু। তো আমাদের সঙ্গে আছেন ব্রিস্টল শহরের জিপি ডক্টর কয়েস আহমেদ। সো ডক্টর কয়েস আহমেদ, আপনাকে আবারও স্বাগত জানাচ্ছি। সো উই already discussed about a lot of things about vaccine, flu vaccine. If people don't take vaccine, মানুষ যদি ভ্যাকসিনটা না নেয় তাহলে কি কি ক্ষতি হতে পারে এবং কারা কারা এটা নিতে পারে, আমরা কথা বললাম এটা হারাম হালাল এই সম্বন্ধ। এখন আমি যেটা জানতে চাচ্ছি, ওকে ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন আমরা নিব, কিন্তু মানুষ ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন নিতে চায় না অনেক কারণে। তার মধ্যে অন্যতম একটা কারণ হচ্ছে সাইড এফেক্ট। সাইড এফেক্টটা হচ্ছে কারো হয়তো বা খারাপ লাগতে পারে, হয়তো ভাবতে পারে এটা ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন থেকে হয়েছে। সো ক্যান ইউ কাইন্ডলি হাইলাইট হোয়াট আর দ্য সাইড এফেক্ট অফ ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন, প্লিজ?
Sure. So first and foremost, as I mentioned earlier, the flu vaccine can't give you the flu. You can't physically get the flu from the flu vaccine because it contains an inactivated form or dead form of the flu virus. So it can't physically give you the flu because it hasn't got the live virus in. And even if it did, your body produces a response. So it won't give you the flu. But the side effects, the main side effect of with any vaccine in particular, is you get some soreness around the injection site. So that's the main thing. And you can get that with any injection, any vaccine, any injection really to the arm. So that's the main side effect. And usually that's very mild, and that's probably the most common side effect. But other things that you might experience are a mild temperature or a bit of a runny nose, so a bit like a cold-like illness, which normally will go away within a couple of days. And it's just your body's response to this vaccine. It's your body's way of showing that it's fighting against this vaccine or this virus in the future if it were to come along. So the main side effects are soreness around the injection site, maybe a bit of a runny nose or a very slight temperature, maybe a bit of a headache or a slight aches and pains, but all of these things are usually managed with some rest, fluids and paracetamol, and only don't last for a couple of days. That's probably it.
Okay. যেটা আমি আপনার কাছে জানতে চাচ্ছিলাম, যেটা কতদিন লাস্ট করে? So it lasts only a few days, that's you saying?
If that. So and it's very mild symptoms. Obviously there are these rare occasions when someone may have a more severe reaction, but that's extremely unusual, extremely rare, and that can happen with any medication, including paracetamol. So we have to be aware that with any medication there's potential for side effects, anything, but generally speaking the flu vaccines are very safe, very effective, and have been around for quite a long time now.
Okay. I think এটার কারণে সাধারণ মানুষের অনেকটা ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন দেওয়ার জন্য ইন্টারেস্ট না। অনেকে বলে যে ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন দেওয়ার পরে আমার আবার ফ্লু আসছে, কিংবা আই ফিল bad, tired, this, that, So what is the reason? Is that could be like they had flu before or just before they had vaccination, or it could be something else, some different kinds of virus? What do you think?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, both of those are possibilities. So they may have had the flu beforehand. They may have had a cold-like virus that's developed since or even before. I mean, if you're unwell with a temperature or other symptoms that are quite severe, you should maybe not have the flu vaccine at that point, and you should speak to your doctor or pharmacist if you're having a high temperature then, or a cold-like illness that's severe, because you don't want to have the flu vaccine if you're feeling unwell. Having said that, you're right. I mean, it could be because they've had the flu just before, they've got a cold, or most likely it's their body's way of showing that there's a reaction to this vaccine. Because the way the vaccines works, very simply, is you have the injection, the body thinks, oh, I'm being attacked by the flu. It recognizes it, it produces a response with antibodies, and then that way, in the future, if you were to get the flu, your body's already ready, it's prepared to attack the flu early on. And that's how vaccines generally work in this instance anyhow. And that's a very simple version of it. And so when you get that response initially, that's when you might have the slight temperature, or the aches and pains, or the headache, or the low-grade fever, or the runny nose. But it's not the flu. We have to clarify that.
Right, okay. That's fine. I am very curious about COVID-19 though, because this is affecting everybody nowadays, isn't it? And we're lucky to have our first vaccine, first time in UK. I think UK is the first country in the world who is right now having the vaccinations. However, we have seen last couple of days, like, people already started some kind of myth. The liquid might have chips inside it, or what is this myth? Can you kindly explain to us, please?
So unfortunately, there's a lot of myths, misconceptions, and false information out there about vaccines and about medical problems generally. And you have to understand that when you come across an article or a video, please always do your own research. I'm not here to tell you what's true and what's not necessarily, although I know there's a lot of information out there that's false. But it's always important to find out where that information's come from, what's the background of that person. Are they a scientist? Are they a healthcare professional? And what's their agenda? And is there any truth in what they're saying? So do your research. But you're right, I mean, things like microchips, Bill Gates inserting microchips. Do you really think that Bill Gates is bothered about what everyone else is doing when, your phone, your laptop, your social media, all of that, people can find out, what you're, doing or where you've been, etc., etc. Would Bill Gates really be worried about 80-year-old people in nursing homes and what they're up to? So we have to be aware of that. And I think, unfortunately, that comes from a lot of information that's distorted or taken out of context.
Sure.
So although I appreciate that people, sometimes will think that this is real, especially if it makes you feel very emotional or it triggers you emotionally, just be aware that there's so much stuff out there that could be actually more harmful than true. And there's no microchips in the flu vaccine or the COVID vaccine. I just want to clarify that.
Definitely, and there is no reason for it to get your personal information via this vaccination. Okay. However, another issue is like flu vaccine. There might be some sort of pork element there, some sort of halal issues there. What about coronavirus vaccine? Is there any halal issues there for our viewers to know?
So sure. So fortunately, the one that we know most about at the moment is the Pfizer vaccine. That's been released, that's been approved by the MHRA, and that's being distributed at the moment and given to people in this country. Obviously, there's lots of other vaccines. There's maybe over 150 to 200 other vaccines in production in various stages or in trials. So that if we talk about the Pfizer vaccine, we understand that there's no animal or pork ingredients in the Pfizer vaccine. So there's no pork element in the Pfizer vaccine. And the way it works is it has this mRNA, messenger RNA, which codes for a spike on the coronavirus protein, similar to the coronavirus spike, and that triggers again your body to recognize it and think it's coronavirus. So it's not the actual COVID vaccine that you're having inside your body either this time. It's different. It's not even an inactivated or dead form of the COVID vaccine virus. It's actually a code that makes you think it's possibly coronavirus that's attacking your body when it's not. But there's no pork element, and it's always good to do your research, but always, again, look at reputable sources like the NHS or the government websites.
So we can assure our community, our South Asian community, particularly our Bengali community, when you receive invitation for coronavirus vaccine, you should go for it. And there is no haram issues there.
Yeah, And yeah, absolutely. And we have to understand that if you have any concerns, always speak to a healthcare professional or do legitimate research, because we know, I'm not saying that everything that is said or the government says is true. You should always scrutinize and ask questions, but from the right sources. When it comes to the COVID vaccine, as you might be aware in the news recently, a couple of people had allergic reactions. That was 2 out of thousands and thousands and thousands of people who had the vaccine. So it's still a very small amount of people.
Very small number.
Very small. But if you have had a history of severe allergic reactions, then the advice is now, don't have the COVID vaccine at this moment in time. Let's wait for more data. And the same applies to women who are pregnant, for example. Not because it's harmful to pregnant women, but because there's no data on it. So it's best to sort of stay away from that for now, but wait until there's more data available, or perhaps when there's a different vaccine like the Oxford vaccine, which might be safer for those groups.
Right, okay. That's fine. আমরা ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন নিয়ে আলোচনা করছিলাম, তো আমরা আবার ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিনই ফেরত যেতে চাই। কোভিড যদিও শুরু হয়েছে মাত্র কিছুদিন আগে, আমার মনে হয় আমাদেরকে আরও ধৈর্য ধরে কিছুদিন অপেক্ষা করতে হবে to see the result, to see how effective it is, and we don't know. A lot of questions remain unanswered at the moment, so we just have to wait. Going back to flu vaccine, so now we are nearly end of December. I think vaccine is started sometime early September, October, around that sort of time. So do you think it's too late for those people who already decided not to go ahead and change their mind now to have it?
Yeah, so the answer to that question is no, it's not too late, because as I mentioned earlier, the flu virus is circulating all year round, but it's worse in the winter period, and usually the worst of the flu season is December, January, February, March maybe even, and sometimes it even extends into April. So there's still a few months ahead where the flu could affect you and could even hospitalize you or a member of your family, and you could still become unfortunately seriously unwell. And don't forget, 11,000 people on average die because of the flu each year, so it can be very serious. So it's not too late. If you are eligible, please do go ahead and have your vaccine, because it can protect you and those around you. And similarly, if you're not eligible but you'd like to have the vaccine, do have a chat with your pharmacist or doctor or a private doctor if needed. And you can still get the flu vaccine if you're not eligible, if it's available and in good supply still.
Okay, so this year particularly, government also relaxed the age limit as well, isn't it? So
yes.
Anyone, doesn't matter, they have either any chronic illness or vulnerable or not, anybody above 50, they can actually have the flu vaccine, isn't it, this year?
That's correct. So anyone above the age of 50. So from December actually, so from just last week or this week, really early on this month, from December the 1st, anyone above the age of 50 can have the flu vaccine for free on the NHS, whereas previously it was over 65s and those with chronic illness, as you've mentioned, those who are pregnant, children. But they've extended the groups, and also affecting our community in particular, if you have an elderly or vulnerable member of the family who's on the shielding list, but you're a younger person who's well, if you live with that person, you're eligible to have it for free as well, and that's important to know.
Right, okay, শুধু দর্শকবৃন্দ, আমরা অনুষ্ঠানের প্রায় শেষের দিকে চলে আসছি কথা বলতে বলতে। তো আমরা যেটা আজকে আলোচনা করছিলাম, আজকে মূলত আমরা ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন নিয়ে আলোচনা করছিলাম। আমরা জানতে পারলাম ডক্টর কয়েস আহমেদের কাছ থেকে আসলে ফ্লুটা কি, ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন দিলে কি হয়, না দিলে কি হয়, তার কি কি সাইড এফেক্ট আছে, আমাদের সময় কি পরিমাণ আছে, আমাদের কি এখনো দেওয়ার সময় আছে কি নাই, এই সম্পর্কে আমরা খুব গুরুত্বপূর্ণ তথ্যগুলো ডক্টর কয়েস আহমেদের কাছ থেকে জানতে পারলাম। তো আশা করি আপনারা যারা আমাদের অনুষ্ঠান দেখছেন, আপনারা দেরি না করে অতি সত্বর আপনাদের জিপির সঙ্গে যোগাযোগ করবেন, এবং লোকাল কেমিস্টও আপনার ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন দিতে পারে, তাদের সঙ্গে আপনি যোগাযোগ করবেন। ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিনটা আপনি যথাশীঘ্রই এটা দিয়ে দেন, কাজেই আপনার এই নানা রকমের ভাইরাস থেকে আপনি যদি রক্ষা পেতে চান তাহলে ফ্লু ভ্যাকসিন ছাড়া আর কোনো বিকল্প এই মুহূর্তে ডক্টর কোয়েস আহমেদ কিংবা আমরা দেখছি না। এনএইচএসেরও সেটাই অ্যাডভাইস আমাদের, বিশেষ করে আমরা বাঙালি কমিউনিটি অত্যন্ত ঝুঁকির মধ্যে বসবাস করছি স্বাস্থ্যগত বিষয়ে, কাজে আমাদেরকে আরও অ্যাওয়ার থাকতে হবে, আমাদেরকে আরও কি বলে আমাদেরকে আরও কনসার্ন থাকতে হবে এটা দেওয়ার জন্য। তো ডক্টর কোয়েস আহমেদ, very briefly for the last minute, if you have anything to contribute.
Sure. I just want to say thank you very much, first of all, for having me today. And it's really important that if you're eligible for the flu vaccine, or even if you're not, but you'd like to have the flu vaccine, please do go ahead. Have a chat with your GP or pharmacist, as we've mentioned. Bear in mind that groups like our Bangladeshi community and ethnic communities are higher risk because of the conditions that we may live in, because of the high risk of other conditions as well that we may have. And 11,000 people each year on average die of the flu. So it's really important to protect yourself and protect everyone around you by having the flu vaccine.
Thank you, Dr. Koes Ahmed, for joining in your fantastic contribution, all this information towards our South Asian community. দর্শকবৃন্দ, আমাদের অনুষ্ঠান যদি ভালো লাগে অবশ্যই আপনারা আমাদের সঙ্গে যোগাযোগ করতে পারেন। আমরা ভবিষ্যতে এ ধরনের আরও স্বাস্থ্য বিষয়ক প্রোগ্রাম নিয়ে আপনাদের মাঝে হাজির হব। পরিশেষে আমি বলতে চাই এনটিভিকে অত্যন্ত ধন্যবাদ। এনটিভির কলাকৌশলী আমাদের ফেরদৌস ভাই, আমাদের বাবু ভাই, আমাদের এনটিভির সিইও সাবরিনা, ওনাদের সবাইকে ধন্যবাদ এত সুন্দর একটি প্রোগ্রাম আয়োজন করার জন্য। ধন্যবাদ। আপনারা সুস্থ থাকুন, ভালো থাকুন, ইনশাল্লাহ আবার দেখা হবে। আল্লাহ হাফেজ।
ধন্যবাদ। আসসালামু আলাইকুম।